Hello, let's talk about editing. So as you might or might not be aware, I work as an editor. And a lot of people often ask me like, how do I edit? What do you use? How do you edit your things? How do you edit your videos or Sean's videos? What do you do? Can you make a tutorial? And it's kind of hard to make specific tutorials for specific cases because, well, it varies greatly from video to video. But I figured I'd make a tutorial just in terms of general editing. I'm going to show you some shortcuts, hotkeys that are default for Premiere. I'm going to tell you what I've added myself. It's only 3 of them, so it's not like a giant deal, but it's very useful for my case. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to handle your footage and what to do to make it easier for yourself to be as modular as possible and be able to change things easily if you need to add or remove things down the line, so you don't have to go back and change a whole mess of crap just to fix a little tiny thing. So a little bit of just editing, a little bit of tips and tricks, and a little bit of how I do it and what I do.
Enchanté.
So this is what you'd be met with when you open up Premiere. This is Premiere 2020. Unfortunately, because they've removed 2018. 2020 is stable sometimes, but it's what I got to work with. So this is what you'd be met with if you just launch Premiere straight out. I've changed my workspace a little bit, so I have a saved workspace up here. This is just the layout that I'd like to use. But if you want to make your own layout or you want to change your workspace, all of these little windows and panels, they're modular. You can just drag and drop them, put them wherever the hell you want. This is what I like to work with, so this is my layout. Now we need some footage. I just recorded a game bit and a camera bit of my own. So I'm just gonna drag and drop them in, and there you go. If you import giant files, it might take a while for Adobe to generate the peak file. You'll see a little bar at the very bottom of the screen, and you'll just have to wait for that. But it probably will happen. Usually, if you're editing gameplay or if you're editing a vlog or something, drag one of the clips that you have the most of in terms of vlogs. If you have different cameras, maybe you shot some with your phone, shot some with the DSLR, some with the GoPro, whatever. Drag and drop one of the ones that you have the most of, or the main thing. In my case, the main thing would be gameplay. So I'm gonna drag and drop the gameplay just onto the timeline, and that'll make a sequence with the settings for the gameplay. So it'll be a 1080p video file with a 60 FPS frame rate, in my case. So you have your clip, you have your timeline. In my case, I have 2 audio tracks. I'm holding down Alt and scrolling on these little side panels here for the audio, so I can just scroll and scale them up to see the waveform a little bit better. If you double click, it'll collapse it back down and you can start scrolling again. This little line in the middle is your volume. Now I've set it up so that I can also change these over here on the side. You also have a master that is called audio track mixer, as opposed to the audio clip mixer. We'll get into all of that in a bit, don't worry about it. So in my case, because I recorded this with OBS, I have 2 tracks, one for the gameplay and one for the microphone. If I'm recording when I'm streaming, I have it set up so that one audio track is just the game audio clean and one audio track is just the microphone clean. I have a tutorial for OBS if you want to know how to set all this up. But what I'm going to do here is import the cam separately. I recorded them separately in this case. So what I would have to do now is line them up with each other. We don't need all of this audio. So what I'm going to do is select everything. You can hit Control A to just select everything. And then I'm going to hit Control L, which is shortcut for link. You can also just right click and you find it right here, unlink. So now the audio and the video is detached from each other. I can move them around separately. Make sure you don't do that and then forget what you were doing, because now the audio and the video is not going to be synced up anymore. So just keep that in mind. Now, the first thing I want to do is sync up the audio with the video. Now, we don't need, in my case, this track because it's empty. That's where the microphone would be, but it's separately recorded this time. And this is empty because that's where the gameplay audio would be. If you record your mic in Audacity or Audition, you just have a voice file that you would have to line up, but this is essentially the same principle. Now, these are the 2 tracks that we want to use. To make things easier on myself, I'm going to select one of them, and then I'm going to right click, label it as, let's say, Rose. Now I'll always know what belongs together with what. So let's just drag and drop that on top of our gameplay. Now I need to sync my camera up with my gameplay. So the first tip for expediencing your editing and making sure that you can always go back and change things should you want to is, at least in my opinion, I would recommend nesting your camera. So here I have my camera layer. Now I would want to obviously key the green screen out. I would want to color correct this. I would want to scale it down and put it in the corner. But what I usually do is before I do anything, before I do any editing or anything at all, I would right click it and then I would hit nest just for the camera itself. And we could call this cam. Now the camera is inside of a nest. So if I double click this, I'll open up the camera itself on its own with nothing else. And I can go back to my gameplay and it'll still be there. But what I can do now is in the nest, I can add my color correction, I can add the green screen keying effect, I can add all of these things. And whatever I do here, if I cut this up a bunch, if I remove sections of it, maybe I remove this bit and just line those up for some reason. Now there's going to be a cut here, obviously. But in the nest, it's always going to be untouched. So if I wanted to add effects or color correction, or I feel like everything in the camera is a little bit too dark, rather than going through every single cut after I've edited a video and changing every cut to match each other and brighten everything up or darken everything down or whatever I want to do, I can always just go into my nest and just do it here. And if I, for example, just to show, change the opacity for some reason, now when I go back, it'll be like that for every cut I've made throughout the video because I did it in the nest. So in our nest here, obviously, the first thing I would want to do is add a green screen keying effect in my case. So I'd search for key in the effect panel and it'll bring up my ultra key. I'll drag and drop it onto the clip. And this is where you just do your green screening. You'll pick a green color, maybe a medium one around here, and then you'd see that, okay, that's not the best key that you could possibly get. I would switch over to the alpha channel, which just makes it black and white. Now everything that's black is going to be transparent in the final video. And then I would have to change, like, okay, I can dial in the shadows, maybe dial in the highlights a bit. I can change the transparency, try to get rid of essentially what I want to accomplish is get rid of all of this noise that's in the black. Maybe even find another green that might just work for you, depending on your lighting situation. But here's the important part. Once you're done with all of your settings, right-click it in the effects panel and save it as a preset. Because this is something that you'd want to use over and over, potentially, if you record more videos using the same camera and the same setup. And rather than doing this every single time, you'll save a preset, name it something cool, and then you can always just find it in your own preset bin on the side here and just drag it back onto your footage. So if I delete this keying that I have here and reset the footage to default, now I can just go into my presets bin, and this is all the stuff that I've changed and made and perfected, using the term loosely. So I have my green screen preset here. I can just drop that onto the footage and it does all of these things for me. And now if I go back into the alpha channel, you can see that I've got a fairly clean key here and I can position this and do whatever the hell I want with it. Now another thing I would do is probably then mask the sides out because we don't want those in the video. So I would have to make a mask. I just click this little pen tool by opacity, and then I'd click right here, right here, right here, and here, and then hook it back up. And now all of the things outside of that mask is just gone. They're not in there. But because I'm still in the nest, I can just pop back out into my game, my master, and then do whatever the hell I want with this. This is just a solid little thing now, a solid group, layer, call it whatever you want. But whatever I do with this now, I can position it, make it fit with the rest of the game, and I can always just pop back into the nest and maybe perfect it, maybe change some things around, and it'll all update down here. Pretty good, right? Now, while we're on the subject of nesting and making sure that you can always go back and change things, another thing I would do in the nest is add the color correction. By right-clicking in your project window, I'm gonna add a new item adjustment layer. Just click that and just hit OK. It'll make a adjustment layer based on your composition. I'll just drag that on top of my video and then extend it to fit the whole thing. Now again, same way that I did for the green screen footage, I have a color correction here. I have a me CC. So I can just drag and drop that onto my adjustment layer and it'll color correct the footage. And this is saved to be extreme, so I can dial it in based on what I want to achieve for the video. In my case, I think 40% looks pretty good. It looks pretty natural, taking away some of the weird like greenish reddish tones that my lighting setup in here is causing. So that's a pretty nice even little lighting setup that I got going, or color correction rather. And then when I go back to the zoo game, bam, there it is. It's just updated inside of that now. It's pretty good. Step next, setting it up for actually starting to edit. So the next thing you'd want to do, or what I'd want to do, before I start editing a gameplay video specifically, is to hit the gameplay audio track and then hit G on the keyboard. It's the same thing as right-clicking the footage and hitting audio gain in the menu, but we can see the peak amplitude of the gameplay audio in this case. -16 is the loudest that the game will ever get in this clip, so I would want to probably just change that. I'll boost it by 10 so that we end up at a peak amplitude of -6. That's probably fine. You'd never want to go over 0. 0 is like the loudest that you should ever get, but I'll talk about audio more in a bit. So we have our peak amplitude at -6 now, and we have our voice track down here, so everything is, loud and audible. Another thing I'd like to do with the gameplay before I start editing is add a curves adjustment to the audio, a compressor to the audio. Again, this is a preset that I've made, so I'll drag and drop that on, but it is just using the dynamics processing. So if you search for an effect and you start typing dynamics processing, there you go, you got it. Essentially what I've done is drag that onto a clip, edit the actual effect, and then change this to my liking. This varies from what you might want, but essentially the way this works is that this is the audio on a scale. This is the low parts of the audio, the quiet parts of the audio, and this is the loud parts of the audio. So probably a good thing to do is to make sure that maybe the quiet parts are a bit louder, but the loud parts are a bit quieter, so that it's more of an even sound. Because you'd want to bring the gameplay sound down so that you can hear the person talking, but you don't want to bring the gameplay sound too low so that you can't hear like footsteps or whispers in the game. And you don't want to keep it too loud because then the explosions or jump scares or whatever it might be might overpower the person speaking. So here's my curve that I've gone with for video game in general. This is just the quiet parts are boosted and then the loud parts are pulled down a bit. I usually tend to adjust this based on the game. If it is a jump scare game, I might want the peaks to be a little louder so that they actually scare people. If there's a lot of explosions, I might bring it down. But now we have the audio with the curves on it and we have the mic. Now we need to line them up. So if you start recording a game or if you start editing for someone who has recorded a gameplay, hopefully they've done a sync at the start of the video, which is basically just doing something on the screen and saying it as you're doing it. So I've gone into the menu here and I've started just hitting down, up in the menu, which is why you've seen YouTubers do that probably. So I'm gonna line that up with when I'm saying down, up in the audio recording of my mic. So right here, I say escape. That's where I hit the escape button to bring up the pause menu. And the pause menu is appearing right there. So I know that this is when I hit escape in the game. I can drag that over to line up with when I'm hitting escape on the mic track. Settings, back. Okay, it seems to line up. So there you got a sync. That's how you sync up the game with the mic and the cam. So now we can actually start editing. Now all of this stuff before the actual video starts, obviously we don't want. So I'm using a couple of shortcuts and hotkeys to edit. C and V is just your main go-to tools. V is just back to the normal cursor to select things or whatever you want to do. C is for cutting. If you just hit C on the keyboard and click on a track, you'll cut just that track. I'll undo all of that. But if you hold down Shift and then click, you'll get this big line that goes through all of it. and it'll cut every single track except for the ones you've locked out here in the side. So if you have a music track in the background, maybe you don't want to cut the music, you can lock that and then cut everything else or edit everything else and keep the music going underneath. But if I cut my tracks, I'm going to hit V again to select all of the tracks before it, hit delete, and then select the empty space before my video actually starts. It'll select a white portion like this of just nothing, hit delete again, and it'll nudge everything back to previous clip or start or whatever is before. In this case, nothing is before, so it'll just line it up with the start of the video. If I had an empty section, I'll just delete a middle like that. If I had an empty section and I'll select the middle part again, hit delete, it'll just nudge it back to the previous clip. That is a way you can edit, but the way I usually do edit is with the Q and W shortcuts on the keyboard. And I'll show you, I've mentioned this previously, I think, but I'll show you briefly what they do. So if I find a place where I want to make a cut and then I want to skip a bit of the gameplay or the video in general, and then I want to cut again and move that back and delete the little bit in the middle that we decided to skip. So let's say I want to cut this bit. I'll hold down Shift, and with the C tool selected, cutting tool selected, I'll hold down Shift and click, and then I'll go to a part where I might want to continue. Let's say I want to continue from here for some reason. Instead of hitting C again, holding down Shift, clicking, hitting V, selecting all the footage, hitting delete, selecting the bit in the middle, hitting delete again to line things up. Instead of doing all of that, just find the point where you want to continue your video and hit Q. It literally did all of that for you. It just cut where you had your marker, your time marker, and then just moved everything back to the previous cut. So if I have a cut here and I put the marker here, hitting Q will just make a cut and move this bit back to here. Bam. One key, and you've just done all of that. Similarly, if you want to go forward, if you have a cut here and you want to like nudge this bit back to here for some reason, you could just like drag and drop it and snap it onto, or you could do the whole cutting and deleting and blah, blah, blah. Or you could just hit W and it'll take the previous clip and move it to your cursor. So learning to edit with Q and W is so much faster than anything. You'll just get into this groove of just like selecting C and going forward in the timeline, making another cut, going forward, hitting Q and W. I'm not happy with that timing on the transition. I'll go a couple of frames back, hit W, and we'll just line it up. The best part about this is that it keeps your transitions. So if you have a soft fade here, a crossfade transition right there, and I go forward and I hit Q, it'll keep your transition, but move the footage. Okay, so let's transition into transitions. Let's segue into Now, right then, I was adding in a default transition. If you hit C and you cut, and then you hover over a cut in a track, it'll show up like this. And if you just click and drag now, you'll just move the end point of that audio clip. But if I right click, I'll get this little menu where I can join through edits, which just puts them back together again, or I can add a default transition. Constant power and cross dissolve are your default audio and video transitions. Now from the get-go, your transitions are going to be longer than my ones. I've set mine to be a little bit shorter than the default because that's usually what I end up using. But if you want to change your default transitions, you can do that in Edit, Preferences, Timeline. I think by default, this is set to 1 second. I just like to keep it at 20 frames because it's better for me. So let's say you have a video with a bunch of cuts. We'll just, for some reason, we'll delete that and we'll delete that and we'll keep those bits. And then you have a bunch of clips. Now, you might think that you're done editing, but this is a very, very important thing. When you're editing anything really, always crossfade your audio. If you don't fade your audio, if you just leave a clean cut like this, you'll end up with weird and uncomfortable poppy clicking noises in your audio tracks. For example, I've just rendered out this one little section without any crossfades or anything at all, and I brought that into Audition, and this is the audio you get. This is where the cut in the video and the audio tracks happen, and you can see that it's going from this whatever this is, ambient sound, and then there's a harsh pop, and then it continues, and then I start talking. This is exactly what you do not want. And if I just add a simple default transition to both of the audio tracks and then render this out, you get this instead. It's all blended together, there's no harsh popping, it all just flows on naturally. So we've gone from this harsh pop to this just naturally flowing, comfortable audio track. And obviously sometimes you want a hard cut, sometimes it's funnier to just have a hard cut of the audio, but I still would recommend you to make a crossfade. The only thing you can do then is to just grab the end of the crossfade like this and just make it 1 frame short. If you just drag it towards the cut, it'll just be 1 frame, it'll still be a hard cut, but it won't have that awful popping noise. But let's say you've edited a video already and you forgot to add the transitions, or your Premiere kept crashing when you tried to do the transitions and you couldn't do it. If you have tracks, 2 tracks, adjacent tracks selected like this, and you hit Shift D, bam, it'll add the default transition to all of your selected tracks. So you can select everything, Control A, and then hit Shift D, and it'll fade every single track you have. Now, it will do that to the video tracks as well. It'll add the default crossfade, so it'll fade the video as it's fading the audio. But you could just lock the video layers, hit Control A to select everything, and Shift D, and now you've faded nothing but the audio. Now, while we're talking about audio, another important thing, to me at least, when editing, is to keep every audio clip at a comfortable listening level. So what I want to do when I'm editing gameplay footage, for example, is to make sure that the voice is always the loudest thing. Even in a jump scare game or an action game with a lot of explosions, I always want the voice of the person playing to take precedent. So for example, in here, let's see, we have my voice is way down here, while the gameplay is almost level with my voice. We're hitting about -13-ish on both tracks, which is obviously not something we'd want. The thing that I said we were going to talk about later, well, it's later now. So I've got my audio clip mixer up here. Now, if I lower my volume on track 1, which is the blue track, the gameplay track, if I lower that in the clip mixer, you'll see this line in the middle of the clip go down a bit. But that's the clip. If I keep playing this now, the gameplay is going to be lowered, but as we get into the next clip, we're back to 0 again. If you do the same thing in your audio track mixer, not the clip mixer, you'll lower everything. Now you won't see that by a line represented here, but if you lower that and then you play back again, suddenly you can see here that we've way lowered all of the gameplay audio. And conversely, if you want to raise the game audio, you can just pull that the other way. But in general, I try to make sure that the gameplay audio is about 1/3 of the voice. Now, when I edit a video, I like to keep my audio at -4 as the default loudness of a video in general. So the voice track in this case would be around -4 as the loudest. We don't want to go over 0, because if you go over 0, then you start clipping and peaking, and that is just horrible to listen to. Even if you add a peaked out sound for funny effect, I guess, make sure to distort it or peak it first, and then export the peaked version and then import that back in, so that you can still get the peaky sound of the clip without actually peaking the audio. Whenever I peak a sound, I never ever actually peak a sound. I make sure that it sounds like it's peaking without actually peaking. And you can do this in multiple ways. You can actually peak the sound and then render it out and add it back in again, or you can just add a distortion audio effects, and then you'd have to make these curves to your liking. And again, once you've made your preset, you can just save it and then you can reuse it whenever. But don't, because peaking audio is annoying. Anyway, so we are at a point where we might want to fix our audio levels. Usually I would do this before, but there's a lot of times when I want to fix it afterwards, or I want to maybe change the overall audio without going into the track mixer and messing with this. I might want to change it for a section or for multiple clips at once without changing everything. So rather than going to a clip that I like the audio levels of, let's say I want this, but I want this level, this audio track, I want this to be applied to this and this, but not the rest of them. And oh man, I've already edited. Well, I could hit this one and then just Control C, which will copy all of the attributes of the clip, and I select other clips. Now I can hit the menu, right click, and paste attributes. So if I do that, you'll see that I'll get this menu. What do you want to take with you? Do you want to skip the effects maybe? No, I want to paste everything, and I hit OK. And then you can see that it instantly lowered the level of these clips, and it's applied the dynamics processing that was on this clip. The problem becomes that it does that on top of what's already there. So remember, we had this processing audio track here already, or audio effect, and we now added another one on top of it, which we don't want because that's going to sound horrible. It's going to sound way like compressed, and everything is the exact same level. The smallest sound, the loudest sound. So let's select those clips again, and then we'll remove attributes. Now, if I do that, it'll remove everything, and we have no processing, we have no audio levels, we have nothing applied to it. Now I can go back in and paste the attributes again, hit OK, and there we have no weird double processing, no other audio levels. We have the exact same thing. Now, that is a little bit of a process. So instead of going in here and selecting clips and hitting remove attributes and then OK, and then going back in and paste attributes and OK in this menu, I've hotkeyed those things. So let me open up the hotkey menu. You got keyboard shortcuts right here. You can add and do whatever the hell you want. I've only added 3 of them, and I'm going to show you what. So I have 1, 2, 3 on the numpad. I've added remove attributes, paste attributes, and frame hold. Over here, you can just search for whatever you want. So you put in frame, and then you get the frame hold option. And then you just drag that onto a key, and it'll be added as a shortcut. So what I can do then to speed up my editing even more, let's say that we want this attribute, this clip's attributes, pasted onto these 2 clips for some reason, but these 2 clips already have other attributes on them. So what I would do then is go to the clip that I want, like this one. I'll hit Control C for copy. Then I'll select all of the clips that I want to do something with. Now, my 1 key is remove attributes, hit enter. My 2 key is paste attributes, hit enter. And we've done all of that. So when I'm editing then, if I'm in that situation and I copy this and I'm like, okay, this and this, 1 and 2, done. That's it. I've just removed all the attributes and pasted all the attributes in like a half a second. So that's pretty good. My number 3 key on the numpad is just a hold frame. So if I were to go to any position here, and then I'll just hit a track and hit 3, it'll hold that frame. So now if I go forward, that'll just be it. So we have our video, we have our audio tracks lined up and leveled out the way we want them. Now, sometimes when you're editing, if you're adding a bunch of effects or a bunch of clips on top of each other, things might slow down. There's a nifty little button that you can use to just turn off all of the effects. If you just want to check the editing or the pacing or something, there's an effects button here, global effects mute. This isn't here by default, but by clicking this little plus down here, you can add in the buttons of your choosing. So essentially you just pick a button you want and you just drag it onto your menu and then hit OK. And now I can mute all of the effects. So if you look at my clip here, my face cam clip that we had color correction and green screen effects on, if I hit mute effects, there you go. There's no color correction and no green screen on that clip anymore. And I can just more easily jump around in my video without Premiere having to process all of those effects every time I do a cut or every time I want to check a pacing or a speed of a video. And then once I'm done, I can just hit that button again and it'll bring all of the effects back. Even if they're in a nest or wherever you put them, it'll just mute all of the effects. Just a neat little trick if you have trouble with slow performance. So those are the most important things in terms of performance and shortcuts and just speeding up your editing process. The rest of it is basically down to taste. In my case, I don't like it when something flickers on screen just before a cut. Let me show you what I mean. For example, let me zoom in here on the actual gameplay and you'll see there's the mouse cursor in the game right there. And it'll go away here, and if I'm turning the camera in the game, it goes away. So it pops back on screen right there. Now let's say I wanted to cut my video here. I'll hit W and it'll make a cut and bring that back to where I was. But now we have this awkward like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 3 frames of the mouse being on screen. So if you play that back, there's like a no mouse and there's like a flicker. There's something happens. And if that is in your video, then when you're watching it, you're gonna feel distracted. You're gonna pick up on the fact that, oh, there was something. Wait, what? It kind of stings your eyes a bit. So if I play this back, you'll see that for just a brief split second, you'll see the mouse cursor appear again. That it's like, no, that's uncomfortable to watch, I think. So what I would do here is step back those 3 frames and move the cut to here instead. And then when you play it back, there's no awkward little flicker of the mouse just being on screen for 3 frames. In a worst case scenario where that might not work because the pacing or the timing with the clip and the audio and the mic. So in a worst case scenario where I just can't move the cut, I would have to go to where I want it to be. Let's say here where the mouse cursor appears. I'll cut that gameplay only, nothing else, and I'll delete that bit. So now we don't have the mouse cursor on screen for that section, but we are missing 3 frames of gameplay. So I would step back a bit to maybe right here where I would start to turn the camera. I would make another cut and then hit R on the keyboard. R is the shortcut for stretching clips. So now instead of, as with the normal tool, the V tool, I would just move the ending and cut it wherever I let go. Instead of doing that, now I'm dragging the clip, extending it, slowing it down essentially. If I drag it closer, I would speed it up. Now it's a very quick time lapse, I guess. But if I drag it the other way, I'll slow the clip down by 3 frames. Now you can see here it says 85% of the original speed is the clip now. And obviously don't do it to a point where your clip is running at a 15% speed because it's just gonna look like lag instead. But if you do it, above 80% and you do it for a short period, no one's gonna be able to tell that one little bit is slower than it should be by 15%, but you've covered the frames and you don't have a pesky mouse cursor appearing. So you've sorted out the issue of covering up that awkward little cut. One quick thing I want to mention before the video is done is a free program called Soundly. So this is what it looks like. It's free and you can organize as many audio clips as you want. It does have a limit though, not to the point where it doesn't work if you have too much audio, too many sound clips, but to the point where if I click one, you can see that some of them are grayed out. Like this one, if I click them, you can see that the free account is limited to 5,000 local files. So because I have more than that, some of them are going to be grayed out. If I restart the program, it'll randomize other ones to be grayed out. So sometimes you can just get around it and find your sound by restarting the program. If you pay for it though, you get infinite, I would assume. So this is a fantastic program to organize and keep track of and just select audio files and effects. Let's say I wanted a hit, I wanted a metal, I wanted an impact. I'll search for impact and it'll bring up, these are all files on my computer. These are my own audio tracks that I bought from various sources and downloaded. Most of it is downloaded from Epidemic Sound because that's where I have a subscription, and it's also the best sound site I can think of. In terms of both music and sound effects, Epidemic Sound is fantastic, bar none. Some of it is from kits that I've bought. Sometimes Humble Bundle has editors kits with a bunch of sound effects or whatever. So I have some sounds here. If I play them back, you can hear them. That's it. You see the waveform, you can hear the sound, and you can choose what you want. Now, rather than finding your folders in Windows and whatever else, you can just either drag the whole thing right into Premiere from the program like this, or you can select a portion in the waveform down here, and it'll create a temporary file that contains just the audio bit that you've selected. So like if I wanted not the start of this clip, or I wanted like maybe just the ending of this clip for some reason, or I wanted this clip but in reverse, I can just do that here, and it's so useful, especially since, let's say I have a clip here of a rain, and I find that this rain sound is a little bit too quiet. You can see on the waveform here that there's barely anything. I can just right-click and hit normalize. So now I can select this whole thing, and it'll just import the boosted audio into Premiere. Now I've just lined it up, play it back, sacrifice, because it kind of works. Obviously, I would want the voice to be louder in this case. Let's say, for example, I'll select all of the voice clips and I'll add my preset for my own voice through OBS. Bam. Now I've just added an equalizer with a couple of settings and a dynamics processing that brings down some of the background noise and reverberation that's in the room, but raises up the conversation. And then once I have that, I'll check through the video one last time, see that everything flows and see that all of the cuts line up and the audio works. And once I'm happy with the video, maybe I'll animate my camera. I'll make a cut in the camera here in the nest. I'll put a keyframe, go forwards, and just move it down. And then I'll right-click the first keyframe, select temporal interpolation, and go ease out. I'll expand the keyframe, and I'll grab this little handle here, and I'll drag it over to smooth out the motion. So instead of having a linear motion like this, where it just kind of awkwardly and weirdly, unless that's what you want, I can add a temporal interpolation, ease out, and then I can smooth it. And now it's gonna do this. Bye. Ooh, a much more smooth and comfortable little animation of the speed of the camera. I think, anyway. Bye. So that's it. That's the video. I'll hit C. I'll cut the end. I'll put on an outro if I so choose, or if I have an outro to put on. And now we have a video ready to export. So I want to go hit Control M in my case. This is just the way I do it. You can use Adobe Media Encoder if you want to have a separate program and you want to queue up a bunch of different videos. That sometimes I do that as well. This is just easy and fast for me. Now I have a preset called YouTube 60. This is just based on the default YouTube 1080 preset that comes with Adobe Premiere. If I select that, you can see that it changes a bunch of my settings. My preset is just basically the same thing. I've just set my bitrate to be a constant bitrate of 20 megabit per second. That's just a good quality for YouTube, I find. And I'll select where to save it and I'll just export it. And that's it. Those are the things I do for just normal default editing, not counting any effects or fancy animating the camera, flying around, or adding, I don't know, visuals to make it look like a VHS or any of these things. This is just normal basic editing. But you have your cutting with the hotkeys Q and W. You have your transitions by either right-clicking or hitting Shift-D to add your default transitions. And now you know why. And you have your nested cam, so you can go back in and change around whatever the hell settings you want to have in here. If you want to maybe make it even bigger in the nest and then have that for the whole video. You know to put dynamics processing on your gameplay audio if you want to level things out a bit and to make sure that nothing is ever louder than the voice of the person talking. And you know how to export a video. So when you're done, you got your good fancy video ready for YouTube. That's about it. That's all you need to know. Now you can go edit a video in Premiere or probably most editing programs, because these are just general techniques and not so much Premiere specific tools. So enjoy editing. See you around. Bye.